Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Uncover with Dale. Today's guest is someone whose life story is rooted in service, faith, sacrifice, and ultimately healing. Aaron was born into a military family raised by a father who transitioned from active duty in the U.S. Air Force to over 50 years of ministry as a Southern Baptist pastor. While faith shaped his foundation, Aaron felt called to serve in a different uniform, law enforcement. From working as a corrections officer at just 18 years old to earning a badge in Texas to eventually serving more than 25 years with the Anchorage Police Department. Aaron's career spanned patrol, K-9, SWAT, firearms, and defensive tactics instructions, crimes against children, cybercrime, human trafficking, and federal task force with the FBI. Along the way, he built a remarkable family with his wife, Monica, a love story that began across borders in Mexico, and together they raised three children in Alaska. And now, without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce Aaron. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us today on Uncover with Dale.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Before we dive into your career, your roots, identity, and calling, you grew up in a home shaped by both military service and ministry. How did that dual influence shape the man you became today?
My father served in the Air Force in the late 60s, early 70s, during a time in this country where service was duly needed, but also was politically questioned. And as a community, as a society, it was difficult. And his father, my grandfather, was a World War II veteran, served in the Marine Corps in the South Pacific. Both my grandfather and my father, while their military career was not something that was common conversation or something that we discussed a lot as a family, their sense of service, their sense of commitment to their community, their sense of responsibility as a father or a grandfather was something that was evident and something that I learned from an early age. It just shaped me in many ways, just in the fact that sense of service, the sense of servitude, the sense of putting that service before self was something that I grew up with and was common and was a real part of our family.
And you once joked that law enforcement was perfect for someone who served, who wanted to serve, but cursed too much to be a preacher. Looking back, what was really drawing you to policing?
Even as a young student in junior high school and high school, I had an opportunity to work with local law enforcement. There was an officer in our community there in Texas working with a program called the DARE program. Some of your older listeners probably are aware of the DARE program. Some of
Yeah.
the younger ones may not. But the DARE program, in essence, was a program that helped to shape the minds of young kids in elementary school and junior high school, helping them understand that choosing a drug free lifestyle was acceptable, was healthy. In my hometown community, we had a police officer that had moved from a large community down in Houston, Texas, to a small community just outside of Amarillo. And she had many, many years of service at the Houston Police Department, which I was drawn to. I was fascinated by that. As my DARE officer, she had the opportunity to select kids that had exhibited a lifestyle of being drug free, trouble free, and she called us DARE role models. And she used us to work in the grades under us. So, like when I was in junior high school, I worked as a DARE role model for the fifth grade. When I was in high school, I worked as a role model for the kids that were in junior high, where I had the opportunity to tell them, hey, being drug free, alcohol free, being trouble free was okay, and didn't mean that necessarily you were the most popular kid, but you also weren't necessarily a cast out. You could just be a normal kid. And that was really my introduction to it. At that point, I knew that there were forms of service out there other than the form of service that my dad ended up going into in the ministry. I had no problems with the ministry. Actually, I spent a lot of my life, especially early in my career, serving and volunteering within ministry opportunities. And I say the part about wanting to cuss too much with a little bit of facetiousness
Yeah.
because I know it's to the chagrin of my mother. She, I'm sure, always hoped that I would be the next Billy Graham, and I always told her, Mom, I want to
Right.
be able to drink beer and I might want to cuss a little bit. And she would always just shake her head and laugh. And she
Yeah.
always, my whole life, she has always said, Aaron, laughter's not approval. And I said, no, it's not approval, but you know what? It makes everything a whole lot easier. And ultimately, as I was coming through high school, I decided that I was either going to join the military right out of high school or look for an opportunity to work in law enforcement. And at the time, I was not aware that local sheriff's departments in our region would actually hire an 18-year-old. And so I was convinced that I probably needed to find an opportunity in the military for 4 or 5 years until I was old enough to get into law enforcement. And I was in communication with a recruiter, actually had them come to the home. I was looking at joining the Marine Corps. And this would have been in the spring of 1990. Had them because I was only 17. I had to have my parents' signature and approval for me to be able to voluntarily sign up for the military. And I had the recruiter come to the house. I had gone through several different trainings with them and seminars and meet and greets, if you will. And I was convinced that that's what I wanted to do. And my
Yeah.
mother was not so convinced. And I remember the day that the recruiter came to the house. She was very polite and was there when he came in, and we introduced one another to my father and my mother. And she excused herself and went back to her room. What I learned later was she went back to pray and pray
Yeah.
that maybe there would be some enlightenment or wisdom in my mind. And I will tell you, Dale, something did happen during that time. My dad was 100% supportive of the idea of me joining the military, both from his military service and his father. And during the course of the conversation with the recruiter, my father said, if there was any additional information that I could give or could say, the only thing I would ask is that Aaron would just wait until he graduated high school. This
Yeah.
was in March of my senior year,
Yeah.
and he said so much can change over the course of your last 3 months of your high school year. He said I just wish he would wait, and he said if the day after graduation he's still convinced that he wants to be a Marine. He said, I will drive him to the recruiting station and we will sign him up. I saw something change in that Marine recruiter, and God bless him. I have nothing negative to say about him, but I saw somebody starting to weasel and worm his way, starting to realize he was about to lose a recruit. And some of the things that he said to me, I don't believe that they were false or lies, but I think they were
Yeah.
great exaggerations.
Yeah.
And watching him go through that and watching him suddenly tell me, well, Aaron, if you wait, I can't guarantee you a spot on the beach.
Yeah.
Beaches in San Diego are beautiful, whatever, you know. And I realized that
Mhm.
that's not why I'm joining the military. That's certainly not why I'm interested
Mhm.
in joining the Marine Corps. But it was very evident to me that I should probably wait. It was only 3 months, and so I did. And during the course of those 3 months of my senior year, there were several things that happened. And one of which was I learned that the sheriff's department in our community in Amarillo, Potter County Sheriff's Department, at the time in 1990 would hire somebody at the age of 18, of course, if they were qualified and passed the standards and the requirements. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to give that a shot. I happened to attend church with, and my family was very close friends with a gentleman who was a lieutenant at the sheriff's department, had been there for many, many years. And so after talking with him, he assured me that he couldn't promise me a position in the department. He couldn't pass the test for me. But he said, if you can get all of the requirements taken care of, he said, I will assure you that your age won't be the determining factor about whether you get hired or not. And so in June and July, I went through testing process. And
Mhm.
by mid-July of 1990, I had been offered a position as a corrections officer at the sheriff's department. And in August 8th, actually, of 1990, I went to work for the sheriff's department. And for the most part, that's been the one full-time job that I've had since I was 18 years old, wearing a badge and a gun and working within law enforcement.
Wow, that's really an amazing story, Aaron. And talking about small world, I actually grew up around Midland, Odessa. So
Oh,
I
okay.
kind of, yeah, and we're not too far apart, us, in age. So wow, definitely
You
small
know,
world.
you know the importance of Friday night football.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Wow. So at the age of 18, you're like wearing a badge, you're carrying a firearm. Do you think we fully understand what that kind of what that responsibility does, I guess, to a young person? You're 18.
Sure. No, there's a funny story with that I'll share, and then I'll answer your question. But I was
Yeah.
18. I had a badge and a gun. I couldn't buy my own ammunition, and I actually had to
Mhm.
have my mom go to the local Walmart with me and purchase the ammo. And I even told the gentleman at Walmart that I was buying it, had my badge, had my ID, and I wasn't 21. And of course, he got a kick out of that, laughed and laughed. So mom helped me purchase my first box of ammo. The fact that I worked in an environment where I was a corrections officer, first and foremost, I will give credit to the ladies and gentlemen that I worked with. There were folks that I started there, that I worked with there, that were twice or maybe even three times my age. They were much older than I was.
Mhm.
And to be quite honest, there was a part of me that had more fear of my fellow corrections officers because I knew that they held in their hand my future. They could help me, they could make or break me as a corrections officer. And if they didn't respect or appreciate me as a fellow officer, if they ridiculed me or didn't like the fact that I was an 18-year-old punk kid, I knew that I could be in a lot of trouble. It was interesting that I went into that career and into that line of work where I was guarding inmates, some of which were multiple time felons, some of them were there for horrible crimes. And I had more fear of my fellow corrections officers than I did the inmates. I think it
Oh,
was
wow.
understood. The
Yeah.
inmates were somebody that you had to keep at arm's length and keep bars between you, but the corrections officers were somebody that were there to help me, and they could either help me or hurt me. And I will give credit to every person that I ever worked with. They absolutely went out of their way to help me. I think there was a lot of learning on my part, a lot of maturing, realizing that in that scenario, while I was 18 and I felt indestructible, I needed to show respect to those senior officers and learn from them and learn how to keep my mouth shut and listen and learn
Yeah.
and ask questions when it was necessary. In a lot of ways, I felt like that was my boot camp. I know
Mhm.
that, hearing stories about folks that have gone into the military, my oldest son is active duty in the Air Force. I know that that's one of the greatest lessons you learn in going through boot camp is you know your place and they
Yeah.
tear you down and then they rebuild you. I went through that process during my early years working in corrections.
And not taking anything personally. I kept telling myself that during boot camp, this is just a journey. This is to get me where I need to go, And at the end
Sure.
of the day, some of the stuff some of the lieutenants said was just so funny. I just tried not to take myself seriously, but other people in my group, they were like crying and taking stuff seriously. I'm like, guys, come on, you know what this is about. But I can understand if you've never left home, boot camp
Sure.
was definitely a challenge for a lot of people. So now you served in nearly every role imaginable: K-9, SWAT, instructor, crimes against children, cyber crimes, human trafficking. And we're going to kind of bounce around a little bit. I'm just trying to paint a picture. Was there a moment where you realized the job was changing you?
You know, here's what I'll tell you. There's no question that it did change me over the course of 33 years total, but boy, it's
Mhm.
sneaky. It
Yeah.
really creeps up on you slowly. And what I will say is, in reflecting back over the course of my career, all of the experiences that I had, whether it be the adrenaline filled moments of Canine and SWAT, or whether it be the heart wrenching moments in Crimes Against Children,
Mhm.
the things that impacted me the most and the things that had the greatest impact and that I struggled with the most were some of the moral injuries that I went through that you
Mhm.
learn, you come to a point where in your experiences, you learn that good doesn't always win. Leaders don't always know what they're doing. Even good men or good women, good leaders that are good people, they don't always make the right decisions.
Right.
And there were some times in my career where I felt like those injuries that I experienced were more detrimental to me than death investigations or homicides or rapes. I think there was a perspective, maybe a habit, a tendency. I was able to compartmentalize so many of those things when I was dealing with victims of crimes. I was able to compartmentalize that and kind of put it in its place. But when the damage or the hurt came from internally, when it came from people that I worked with or coworkers or supervisors or commanders, that really impacted me. And I use an example. I've given this a time or two. Once I came to the realization of it, it so succinctly describes in the great, amazing classical movie, The Wizard of Oz, there's the scene where Dorothy and the Tin Man and the lion, they finally pull back the curtain. And behind the curtain, what they find Instead of the great Oz, they find just an old man who knows how to pull the levers and switches and make a great voice. And the movie has a great ending. The movie has a wonderful moral story. But there's a
Oh,
part of me that wonders if at the moment that the curtain was pulled back for me in my career and in my life, and I realized that good doesn't always win, that right doesn't always come out on top, I wondered if was I better off when the curtain was closed and I thought there was a great Oz behind it, that there was somebody who was in charge and in control that knew all that was going on from the first line supervisors and officers to the commanders. There was somebody that was in charge and they truly were controlling it. Or when I found out that in fact they're just human beings like I was, they were fallible, they messed up, they made mistakes. That was one of the hardest things for me. And I think the thing that impacted me the most was that in my mind, I guess I had grown up with the idea that good always wins and that if you do right, you'll always come out on top. And that's not life. Life's not always fair. And that was more of a struggle for me than anything because it caused me to start to question some of my own calling to service and some of my own desire to want to serve and some of the willingness to make sacrifices in my own life to do good. I started to turn inward and started to turn selfish to where I just wanted to protect myself.
yeah.
And it made the final years of my career very difficult. I think any career that you're in, whether it be military service or whether it be the ministry or
Mm,
whether it be police service, if you're not doing it for a true act of service, it can be very draining and it can deplete you very quickly.
yeah.
And I think that's where I began to see and to realize that something had changed. It had changed inside me and it had changed me. And wasn't really sure what to do. Prayer and counseling. I talked to some of my coworkers, closest friends that I could confide in, and even sought some counseling outside of the department just to say, hey, what's going on? And it was a struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Aaron, you hit on so many things just now with everything you just shared. We're trying to do the best we can. My podcast is about not just military first responders, it's about faith, life, and the way life shapes us. And I think we all can agree we're all navigating a broken world. And the pursuit of goodness sometimes comes out evil. Sometimes our leaders think they're pursuing good, or the people who are in charge of us, and it may come out looking evil, but the beginning of it was the pursuit of something good. So when you see that we're all broken and we're all trying to do the best we can, it does kind of change your perspective and your heart can become hardened. However, on the flip side of that, when you see that people are just people and they're broken and they have so much, life has happened to all of us different. Your childhood was different from mine, just
Mhm.
like everyone we meet, and it shapes us, that foundation. So you hit on all of that. Policemen, they're here to protect and serve. However, they're still human, just like doctors,
Yes.
just like anybody. So when the law enforcement, it teaches you control, suppression, and emotional discipline, but at what cost do you think?
That's so true. I think the end of the story is I retired in 2023, and I've spent the last 2 years really focusing and working on a journey of wellness and of health. And,
Yeah.
and that's really what brings us together today. What I'll say going back is looking back over the years, I'm convinced that I developed a whole series of habits that help me survive, that help me be able to compartmentalize, to be able to deal with these situations, whether it be controlling my emotions in high stress, high adrenaline moments, or whether it be controlling my emotions during really intense interviews or interrogations, even criminal interrogations with employees during my time as an investigator for the department in internal affairs. There there were a lot of habits that I developed that served me very well in my career. I don't know that they served me very well in my personal life. And I think that at some point, those habits become a little bit like they grow to the point that they start to take over. And I know that the cost that I began to see and to realize is that I began to withdraw from a lot of the things in my life that made me an interesting, vibrant, fun person. I began to withdraw from the community of my church. I began to withdraw from hobbies and activities that I had spent a lifetime honing my skills and practices. And I
Mhm.
began to withdraw from those and began just focusing and staring inward, just realizing that I wasn't happy. I didn't feel right. I didn't feel good. But during the course of my career, other than seeking some counseling and confiding with my wife and praying with
Mhm.
her, I just didn't find any real relief. And I became convinced that, at least in my life, I became convinced that retiring and leaving the career and spending some time focusing on my wellness was necessary. I was fortunate in the fact that in Alaska and at the department that I was at, we had a 20-year pension and then we had a 25-year pension that included medical. I had made it far enough in my career, I was relatively certain that I'd make it to 25. And I'm proud to be able to tell you that I worked 25 years and 1 day before I retired just to make sure I had enough. But during the last few years of my career, I began to really research and to seek some assistance and some help and try to find something that was outside of the traditional day in and day out counseling or the use of a antidepressant or SSRI. And I won't discount the potential good that those can serve in somebody who's really suffering. During my darkest times, I will say that I never felt suicidal. I never felt like I had no hope. I was cautious to use the word depression during that time. I look back on it now and I realize I was suffering from depression, and it was just causing me to hunker down and caused me to self medicate using alcohol, which didn't help the depression, but it made me feel a little bit better during the time that I could have a few drinks. And ultimately, that downward spiral just continued. Fortunately, it didn't end in, horrible relationship, a divorce, any of those kinds of things. My wife and I will be celebrating our 30th year of marriage this year. My
Mhm.
kids are all adults. They like me. They like to spend time with me. I'm very fortunate that my wife was there by my side, blessed by God that she sustained a lot of our relationship where I was failing, just in the fact that I was struggling.
Mhm. And, I know you have your foundation with your father being a minister. Do you think that that protected you? I mean, many first responders self-medicate, veterans. Why do you think alcohol becomes such a common coping mechanism in the profession?
Well, your first question, I have no doubt that the prayers of my mother, my father, before my grandmother passed, the prayers that she said for every one of her grandkids, there is no question in my mind that that intercession on my behalf helped.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, over the course of my 33-year career, I carried a small little book, and that book had three letters in it,
Mhm.
three handwritten letters. One was from my mother, one was from my oldest sister, and one was from my wife. And they were just letters that they had written either during a birthday or during some special occasion, holiday, that just kind of extolled me as a man, as their son or their brother or their husband, that recognized the role that I have and was a blessing to me. And I carried those over the course of my career, not the full 33 years because I wasn't married in the beginning, but over the course of my career, I carried those in my uniform in my left pocket, sort of as a good luck charm. As
Yeah.
far as why I think people, especially in environments like law enforcement, military, but quite honestly, I don't think it's exclusive to our occupation, our career. I think
Mhm.
alcohol is very effective. It's a very
Mhm.
strong depressant drug. And I think it's very effective at giving a little bit of relief. The problem is, and the fact that it's legal and that it's readily available, it's socially acceptable in most circles. The problem is, it is a depressant drug.
Yeah.
And even if it's just a little bit, it just exacerbates those issues and those feelings. I think the reason people turn to it is because of the fact that it's socially acceptable and the fact that it's readily available and legal, relatively cheap, depending on the state you're in. We have a pretty significant tax on it here in Alaska, but
Yeah.
I think those are the main reasons. And it's an escape. There's no question. It didn't help me in the long run. It didn't help me in solving any of the issues that I had. But in the 3 or 4 hours of time that I had, my favorite bourbon or rum, I would quit thinking about it. I would quit thinking about my work phone and quit thinking about whether it was going to ring, whether I was going to have a call out, whether there was going to be another, emergency. I would stop thinking about that. And that was a relief, but it doesn't make it go away, it doesn't change it. And then of course the compounding fact that adding a depressant drug to somebody who's already suffering from depression, I'm not a doctor, but I'm certain that that
Yeah.
just makes the problem worse.
Yeah, it does. It does. And one thing I appreciate what you said, Aaron, when I first contacted you, you're like, I will share what I know personally from my life. I can't speak for other people or other situations. I admire that for you, but I would love to get your opinion on there's a lot of veterans and even ex-policemen who are in prison. Do you think it's because they just haven't received the support they needed to treat the PTSD, the trauma? And again, it's not just first responders, like you said, it's childhood trauma, whatever you went through. Do you think there was just a disconnect there, and that's why the numbers are so high? Why some end up incarcerated? And I know you can't speak to this personally, but
No,
just
but I do, and I will tell you that in the final years of my career and after I retired, I researched endlessly the idea of using plant-based medicines for dealing
mhm,
with PTSD and post-traumatic stress. And for those who aren't aware or not familiar, the use of entheogens, a substance that causes a psychedelic reaction within the body, these substances such as psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine,
mhm,
they are natural substances that are created on Earth or here on Earth, and the research is undeniable in the impact and the effect that they have in treating PTSD and post traumatic stress. And I was aware of it. I read about it. I listened to podcasts on it. But during the time that I was working, I was convinced that it just was not a viable solution, partly because of the licensing agency within the state.
yeah,
There are some states that are a little more free or liberal in the idea. Colorado, Oregon. I know that there are states that are out there, but I was scared that anything that I did in pursuing something like that, even if it worked, it could jeopardize the potential of me getting to my 25th year and having that retirement available. And so I put it off. But ultimately, after I retired, I really started researching it further. I sought out some counseling that the counselor that I'd been going to for several years, talking to him, great man, wonderful doctor, really not very educated or knowledgeable about this new process where psychedelic assisted therapy. He really admitted that it's not something that he was aware of, that he would try to do some research. And so I found additional resources that I could talk with and to try to learn about some of the mechanisms by which these substances were supposed to help somebody deal with their trauma and deal with this post traumatic stress and moral injuries and all that. And ultimately, in the fall of 2024, I learned that the University of Alaska here in Anchorage was hosting their first ever conference on psychedelics. It was for professionals to attend. There were a lot of very, very educated, knowledgeable people there. But I talked with my contact counselor and said, "Do you think it would be a good idea for me to try to attend that?" And she said, "There's a great opportunity for you to make some contacts and to find some resources that maybe you're unaware of." And so I signed up. I went to the conference. It was a 3 day conference, most of which was way over my head, talking about neurons in the brain and neuroregenesis and things that I really didn't understand. During that time, I attended one particular session, and there was a gentleman there. He was a retired Navy SEAL by the name of Diego Ugalde. And Diego provided about an hour-long presentation about some of his trauma and stresses that he had gone through from his active duty time, from being in combat zones. And he told about truly transformational experience that he had using entheogens. I don't remember specifically if it was ibogaine or ayahuasca, but he went to a clinic and went through a series of ceremonies, and it was transformationally changing in his life, and it completely helped him resolve some of the issues that he had had. Interestingly enough, and admittedly, he said a lot of what he was dealing with wasn't from the combat zones and the horrors of war. it was from his childhood. But after class, after listening to him, I spoke with him and asked him if to his knowledge, whether any of the organizations that he was familiar with, if they offered anything like that for law enforcement or first responders. And he admitted that the organization, I believe it's Heroic Hearts, is something that is specific to veterans and for military. And they do an amazing work. I personally have not experienced anything with them, but I've read a lot about them. I've talked to now dozens of veterans that have gone to seminars and to retreats with Heroic Hearts. Phenomenal organization. And Diego said, give me a day. Let me do some research. He said, let me have your phone number. We exchanged information. And to be honest, I really thought I'll never hear from this guy. He's just kind of patting me on the shoulder saying, oh, sure, I'll look into this for you, Aaron. Thanks for your service. Now go away.
Right. Yeah.
But in fact, that night he texted me the name of two different organizations, one of which is called the Siren Project out of California. The Siren Project is founded by a husband and wife. Both of them were first responders, firemen, that have their own stories of trauma and dealing with that, both of which resolved much of that trauma or PTSD in using entheogens during their ceremonies. To make that long story short, which I know it's too late, Dale, but ultimately I reached out to the Siren Project, not even certain that I would be eligible being retired. I thought, they're going to say, well, sorry, you're retired. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately they said, no, you're absolutely eligible. And so I started the process in the fall of 24. There's a process. It's not like you just send your name off. There's a 3 or 4 month process by which you go through a medical screening. I had a lot of work to do. I was severely overweight. I had extremely high blood pressure. My cholesterol was off the charts. I was not doing well. Today, I'm down 80 pounds from 2 years ago. I'm off all my medication, off the blood pressure medicine, off the cholesterol medicine. But I had a lot of work to do. And so I started working very diligently and found a primary care physician here in town that had a background also in nutrition. Started working with her and expressed to her, I said, I am serious about making a change. 5 or 6 years ago, I got serious about making a change. I trained the entire year to run 2 half marathons, not one marathon, but 2 half marathons.
Oh,
And I ran both half marathons after training for a year at 278 pounds. I didn't lose much weight and ran them both. They weren't fast. I didn't do well, but I finished them both and shared that with the doctor. I said, I'm serious. When I get serious about something, I'll do it. I said, but
mm-hmm.
running isn't going to do it. I can't run the weight off. I need help. And so she started working with me with my diet.
Mm-hmm.
The Siren program, the Siren Project, they have a diet plan. And then they also have counselors and coaches that you start working with in preparation for a retreat. And so I started working with both a coach and with their medical staff, started working on my diet. They have a whole program that they send to you. You start working through it. And some of it was difficult.
Yeah.
Stopping alcohol, stop drinking alcohol. That wasn't difficult because of an addiction. It was difficult because of a habit. My
Yeah.
body wasn't addicted to it, but it had become very habitual. In the evening, I had a drink or two. Stopping processed foods wasn't as difficult. Getting off
Right.
caffeine, it took a little bit, but that wasn't that difficult. Over the course of my life, I've spent a tremendous amount of time in the wilderness, in the backcountry here in Alaska. Getting off caffeine while I'm out there, I knew that there'd be a day or two of headache, but I'd get over it.
Yeah.
You push through it. Ultimately, in April of 2005, I traveled down to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where I participated in a week-long retreat with 7 other strangers, seven, I can say now, some of my dearest friends in the world, but 7 other first responders. About half of us were police officers and about half were firemen or medics.
Right.
And we all came to Puerto Vallarta with our own baggage, if you will, and with our own traumas. And over the course of the week, and getting to know one another, and working with the facilitator and the doctor, it was an incredible transformational experience. And then, of course, we also participated in the ceremony where we consumed psilocybin mushrooms, magic
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms, if you will. I use those terms sparingly, but so that your audience understands. The fact is, I truly believe that these substances are sacred medicines. Often, if you just say the term sacred medicine, somebody says, well, do you need a prescription for that? But when you say psilocybin mushroom or magic mushrooms, they say, oh, I do know about that. I'm familiar with that. And the experience that I had, like I said, I really don't have another word to use other than transformative, but I truly felt during the course of my ceremony, I felt my heart heal. I don't know how to describe the mechanics of it or how to wrap my brain around what actually happened, but I felt connected to not only to the universe, but to the individual people that I was there with. I felt connected to the earth. There was one part or one portion that I felt and heard the earth breathe. I don't know how that's possible or how that works, but I know that at the moment that I was there under the influence of the psilocybin mushrooms, I felt the earth breathe. I could hear it and I could feel it. And as I felt my heart heal, it was literally the best way I can describe it. It was like when somebody goes to a computer and they push Control Alt Delete. And
Yes.
it's not that I forgot everything. My program was all still there. I was still there. Aaron still existed, but it
Mhm.
seemed like all of those doubts, all of those disappointments, all of the deceptions that I felt like I had suffered just literally were just washed away or flushed away. And only thing was left was just me, just Aaron.
Yeah.
The slate was wiped clean, and I have learned to not only express but to feel joy and love again like I haven't felt in years and years. I I know folks in the military or first responders don't want to hear this, but I learned how to cry again. I've cried more since April of 2024, 25 than I've cried in 30 years. But it's
Yeah.
been transformative to let that out. And some of those tears were tears of joy and of rejoicing. Some of them have been of regret and of sorrow as I've sat and had conversations with loved ones, telling them, basically, hey, I'm sorry that I've been distant. I'm sorry that I missed portions of your life because I was
Mhm.
dealing with some of my own stuff. One of the songs that we heard during our ceremony, I don't know who wrote it, but I know who sang it. It's not her song, but the song in Spanish basically says the four words. It says, Lo siento, which is I'm
Absolutely.
sorry. It says, perdóneme, which is forgive me. And then it says, thank you, gracias. And it says, I love you, te amo. And
Mhm.
the mantra of the song could not have become more real to me in sort of a mission and a direction that I needed to go, which was I needed to forgive myself, ask forgiveness from the other folks,
Mhm.
my kids, my wife. That was one of the first things I did was I wrote a letter to my wife, and I used those four words and just saying, look, during the course of my career and during this dark portion of my life, you have been there. I am sorry that you had to go to cross country meets by yourself or wrestling matches by yourself because I was at home and just couldn't bring myself to be involved in another social activity. I just was I couldn't. It created such anxiety and created such angst in me. She wouldn't even ask me to do it because she knew that it wasn't that I was making it up. It was real. And asked her for forgiveness for that, told her that I was sorry, told her thank you for being so strong and being there for me, and told her that I love you because without her strength and without her clarity and commitment and being there for me, there were times that I wasn't very lovable. I hope now I'm 53 years old, been
Mhm.
retired for 2 years. I've been on this journey the last 2 years, focusing on my health, focusing on my wellness, and really focusing on trying to make up for lost time with my wife, with my siblings, my parents. I want to talk about an interesting conversation as we talk about this whole process and my retreat to Puerto Vallarta, having a
Mhm.
conversation with my parents about that, who kept asking, Aaron, you seem so different. You've lost weight, but you seem happy. You seem content. You seem so different. What's going on? I put it off, put it off, put it off. And finally, I told my dad, I said, I'll talk with you. I'll tell you. I'm just going to have to ask you to listen though, because it's not something that you're probably going to be able to. For about 2 hours, we sat and talked, and admittedly, he said, I don't know what to say because I don't really know anything about what you're talking about. The idea of entheogens, the idea of dealing with PTSD using these substances, I have no idea, but clearly something's working in your life. Clearly you have changed. You've turned the corner. And he said, and in that sense, I'm proud and happy for you. And if ultimately this allows you to draw closer to God, to seek clarity in your spiritual life, then it can be bad. And that's the journey I'm on right now. And the journey is trying to determine, what does service look like for me now?
Mhm.
I'm relatively certain, I'll never say never, but I'm relatively certain I'll probably never wear a badge and a gun again. Other than the Second Amendment, I might carry a gun, but I won't wear a badge and gun again. I don't think that that's in the cards. But in the last 8 months or so, I have felt the rekindling of a desire to serve, similar to what I felt 34 years ago, 33 years ago when I started in law enforcement. I just want to be cautious about what that looks like and where that's going to be. I'm also seeking and kind of searching to see what spirituality looks like for me. I grew up in church. On Sunday, if the doors were open, we were there. On Wednesdays, if the doors were open, we were there. And there came a point in my life as an adult where I felt a little bit disillusioned by that, not by spirituality and not by God, but by what I had identified as religion. And so I'm seeking a fresh start and looking at, what is it that spirituality is going to look like? What is a relationship with God going to look like for me? And how does that look within my community? We spent the last 6 months, 8 months or so, 6 or 8 months, visiting a lot of different churches. One of the transitions my wife and I have gone through is the fact that the majority of our life we had kids, and a lot of the
Mhm.
decisions we made about where to worship and where to go to church had to do with where they fit in well or where they connected. And now that we're truly empty nesters, that was one of the things we said, let's find some place that's fresh and new, some place that's for she and I. And so we started visiting, and as a matter of fact, about November we really came to the conclusion that we found a place that we're going to be a part of, but we were going to be traveling for about 3.5 weeks in December. So we said, let's wait. And after the new year, we'll commit and go through the processes of meeting with those individuals at the church and kind of making that commitment. We didn't want to show up and say, hey, we're joining your church. And but by the way, we're going to be gone the next 6 weeks.
Right,
So,
right, exactly. Yeah, yeah, the church road can be a journey in itself. So, I mean, Aaron, I've had the pleasure of talking with you now, Diego, Rob, just a policeman, my friend Peter in the UK, who's a Bobby out there, and just sharing your journey. It's really speaking to so many people. You mentioned Control Alt Delete. You've had a reset with the psychedelic therapy. You mentioned you know how to cry now, which we're living in an age of masculinity. Some people call it toxic masculinity. And I think a lot of things have been lost with a lot of men trying to get to that point of that masculinity. You found healing through crying and being vulnerable. And I just think it's beautiful as a male. And I think it's wonderful that men are still able to cry and still maintain their masculinity. What does joy feel like now compared to before?
boy, it literally feels like the first breath of air after holding your breath for a long time. Just being able to not only listen, I could fake as good as the best of them, but to feel joy, to have one of my kids or to have my wife share something with me that they are overjoyed, they're just bubbling with joy, and to feel that joy with them. I think one of the bad habits that I developed, I understand how it happened, but basically it was that drama leads to chaos. Chaos leads to danger, and
Mhm.
danger, I don't go home at the end of the night. And so over the course of my career, I learned to try to nip drama in the bud as soon as I saw it, whether it was dealing with a situation, a domestic violence situation, whether it was dealing with an intoxicated subject. Nip the drama in the bud as quickly as you can, and just don't deal with it, because drama is going to lead to chaos. Chaos is going to lead to danger. Danger, you don't go home. The problem is I began to get really good at that, and it then morphed from drama to all emotions, all feelings, to where I wouldn't feel that joy. And feeling joy now, like I said, it literally is like a breath of fresh air. It is just being able to truly feel genuine excitement and enjoyment for someone or
Mhm.
with someone. It has been incredible. And I'll say this about the tenderness or being able to cry. I think that there is nothing more courageous, strong, powerful, and fierce than for a man to be able to show their emotion and be
Mhm.
able to express joy, sorrow, sadness, complete the task or the job that they need to do. But I think so many times we forget and we think, stop the emotions, stop the drama, stop the chaos. If we can stop it and then just do the job, we have to remember that we are emotional creatures. We were created to feel those emotions. One of the truly differences in, these thumbs right here make us a little bit different than the animal kingdom, and our free will and our emotions, to be able to share those emotions. I think it's important to remember, and I would encourage folks to understand emotions, especially sadness, sorrow, trauma, things that go along with, never, ever go away. You can stuff them down, you can shove them down, you can stop them temporarily, but eventually they're going to have to come out. And I would encourage and tell folks, find an opportunity, find a way. I think one of the things that these entheogens do, one of the things that these sacred medicines allow us to do, is to set aside that part of the brain. I think they call it the amygdala, the fight and flight. When emotions start to get kicked up, then immediately we are like, okay, I either got to fight or run. These substances set that aside and
Yeah.
allow you just to experience the situation. And if it means experiencing some trauma or experiencing some bad experience that you had or recalling it, it
Mhm.
allows you to experience that without that fight or flight. And it completely changes the entire dynamic of how you deal with it.
Yeah.
When it doesn't trigger you, suddenly you find that, wait, I can handle this a lot better. When I get triggered, maybe I just see red, or maybe I just, and it's so important. And that's, it's not a one-time thing, meaning you go to a retreat in Mexico and you do this substance one time and everything's hunky-dory and great from then on. It's a daily challenge and a daily balance.
Mhm.
But I can truly say that my mind has changed, the way I think about life, the way I approach individuals. During Christmas, I was with a family member that I hadn't seen in years. Most of the time when we saw each other, we had some conflict.
Mhm.
And I told my wife, I said, that is the first time in nearly 30 years of being around that individual that I saw him as a human being and as a person. We were able to have some amazing conversation and amazing communication. And I won't take all the blame. He can be difficult sometimes.
No,
But I think what
how
happened
can you
was
relate?
he would come into the relationship pushing, and I'm not usually the kind of person that backs down. And so then I would push back, and then we would just hit head on. It was incredibly healing and emotional to be able to see him just as a human being, even with some of his flaws and my flaws. But we were able to look past that and just spend several hours together reminiscing and talking, and not an argument, not a negative experience. And I do believe that that's directly related to the journey that I'm on and the
Yeah.
way I'm responding to those situations.
You hit on so many points, and it kind of addresses my next question. What would you say to first responders who recognize themselves in the early symptoms but feel trapped? People who are hyper aware, like me, whether it's from childhood, I see people, I see their actions, and my mind starts thinking, okay, that's not right. Because I'm really hyper aware, and it could come from being a policeman, your childhood, being a first responder. What would you say to the people who have those symptoms, but they feel like this is just how I am?
I'll reflect back on my days in canine working with patrol apprehension dogs or police canines. And there's a saying that goes like this: hurting dogs bite. Those dogs that are hurting, that have been abused, that have been tortured, whatever, hurting dogs bite.
Yeah.
And if you as an individual find yourself acting more like a hurting dog, biting the head off somebody, taking away the joy when somebody's just trying to tell you something they're excited
Mhm.
about, cynicism, jaded.
Mhm.
I think those are all direct symptoms and directly connected to and related to the fact that you're hurting. And what's causing that, it's different for every single person. But if
Yeah.
you turn into a hurting dog, a dog that bites, you have to understand that you need some help and you need some assistance to deal with that. Find a trusted confidant that you can talk with. Find whether it be somebody that's a professional within counseling counseling or someone within the faith structure of the church who can listen to you, be non-judgmental and listen. One of the things about the human body that is astonishing is that, short of major diseases and such, the body is such a miraculous thing that if you feed it right, you put the right things in it, for the most part, it's self-correcting. And
Yeah.
for the most part, it will right
Reset.
itself.
Yeah.
And I think there's some truth to that in the psyche as well, the psychological or the emotional, is that if you feed it with the healthy nutrition, you surround yourself with people that are encouraging. I get the fact that first responders and military both have a dark sense of humor. It helps us in so many ways. I get it. But if that becomes the only thing that you have, then you have to understand and recognize that that's not healthy. It's not healthy for the people around you. It's not healthy for you. And I would say find someone that can help you with that. There are organizations online, if you want to be anonymous, that could help you deal with it, where you could just talk through it. And I have
Mhm.
found that when you start talking, if you open up and actually are being honest and you're sharing from your heart, most of the time you will say out loud what you need to hear internally. You will say it and your brain will recognize it. You'll be like, you know what? I'm not a counselor, but I think I just said what I need to do.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, if anybody has ever been around a therapy dog, a dog that's trained to help in the crimes against children unit that I worked in, one of
Hmm.
the advocates had a dog that was a therapy dog by the name of Jackson. They would bring Jackson in during interviews with children that had been victims of sexual assault. And oftentimes the kids would sit and spend time getting to know Jackson and pet Jackson. And we had different techniques, everything from playing with Play Doh or pipe cleaners, making little figurines and such, just to help the children feel comfortable.
Hmm.
Because the bottom line is they're sitting in a room with another adult, a guy that looks like, but
Yeah.
the point is sitting there with another grown man or with a grown man expecting, that's expecting the man's expecting you're going to talk about probably the
Hmm.
worst experience you ever had in your life. I found that Jackson, just his presence in the room, this black lab could come in and could absolutely change the dynamics of an interview with a child, even a
Hmm.
child that had been through some horrendous assault or sexual assault. Having that dog there just brought a peace and a calm. I said during one of my ceremonies in Puerto Vallarta, I said, I don't want to be a herding dog. I want to be like a therapy dog. I want to be like Jackson. When I
Yeah.
walk into a room, I want people just to feel at ease and at peace. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to see a genuineness in me. In the last couple of years, I spent a lot of my career and my life putting on a facade and a face mask, making sure that I was tough enough and strong enough that I wouldn't show my emotion, that I wouldn't show fear, that I could control my adrenaline so that I could, either ask questions or deal with the situation without getting all shaky. I'm just in a different place in life now. I don't do what I used to do. And now I want to be a teddy bear. I want to be like a big therapy dog. I just want to bring peace and enjoyment to the environment. And if I can do some good, then by gosh, I want to do some good.
I love it. And I can tell, and I'm sure our listeners, you're in such a good place of healing now, Aaron, because you obviously love yourself. And when you love yourself, you want to love other people, you want to love the world. The show I had the other day, we were talking about that. When you're at a good place, you want to make everything else around you beautiful. You want to make everyone feel loved. And I think that's
Absolutely.
kind of what a lot of our society is missing right now. Just a lot of people are unhappy walking around. And so when we're unhappy, we punish others to lift ourselves up. And so when you're healed, you don't need to do that. You don't need to use your words to cut people or your actions. And I just love that. And I'm so glad you're in a place like that. And I'm slowly getting there. I'm, broken like all of us, but I want to make the world a better place with my presence. If someone listening is skeptical or afraid or unsure, what do you want them to hear most today out of what you have? And again, we're talking to civilians, first responders, everybody. What would you like them to know about psychedelics and just healing?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I will tell you, Dale, it is not my intention or my plan or my desire to try to convince anybody of anything. My role here, talking with you, is just to share with you my experience. And I would say that if a person is skeptical or in general they want to debate a matter, do your research, do some reading, and see that the research is undeniable at the impact that this is having to an individual. Every single person that I have come in contact with that has experienced a similar situation like me, they've been to a retreat, they've gone through some type of psychedelic assisted therapy. I will tell you, it is not about them. It is not about me, meaning that the healing certainly is something that I experienced, but the sharing of the story, the sharing, I get nothing for putting this information out or encouraging somebody to look into it. People can understand that there is help out there. The research has been, it's still ongoing. I just saw here in the last few months, the state of Texas passed a $50 million item to do research for the use of ibogaine in dealing with PTSD. And that the state of Texas is really leading the way in that sense. And it makes me proud and optimistic that people like Brian Hubbard and Rick Perry are out there, the former governor of the state of Texas, being an advocate for this. The thing that I would say is, for those who are skeptical, you can do the research, you can look into it. I'm not going to try to convince you one way or the other. For anybody who knows me, for anybody who knew me over the last 30 years and maybe knows me now, they recognize and realize the change that has occurred in me. For people that might be a little bit fearful or uncertain, what I would tell you is there are any number of legitimate organizations out there that would walk you through this process. There are both clinical environments that are more like a doctor's office where you're under a doctor's care in a facility, or there are more ceremonial circumstances where you're there under a doctor's care, but it's more involving the heritage of the culture and that kind of thing. Research it, read about it, find out about it. If you were to look into seeking some type of assistance, psychedelic assisted therapy, many states offer some type of psychedelic assisted therapy within their state, whether it be ketamine or some of the other substances. And a lot of states are now working on trying to bring some of these other substances to the forefront. I'm hoping that as a nation, we continue to become educated and realize that these substances aren't the fearful, dangerous thing that we kind of grew up and that I taught as a dare officer. I taught a lot of kids, worst thing in the world was LSD or PCP. And I'm not here today suggesting that they're not dangerous. Recreational use of those substances can be very dangerous or detrimental. But the set and setting and the clinical or the psychedelic assisted therapy, the use of those substances during that can be transformational in your life, can help you. It helped me have that control alt delete, to have that reset in my life, just to be able to refocus. Life is far too short to spend angry, cynical, jaded, hurt. As that reality came to my mind, I knew that I had to find relief and find a way that I could recover from that. And I'm not 100%, but I'm much closer today than I've been in decades.
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me
Okay.
okay? Okay. We
Yes.
just had a small camera glitch, no worries, but this has just been amazing. I just want to thank you for taking the time to just share your story as a former policeman, a man of faith, growing up in a military family and realizing just we can get help. We don't have to settle for what life has done to us. It's never too late to battle those addictions, whatever it may be, whether it's through psychedelics or maybe going to a program called The Road Home in Chicago.
Mhm.
They take you in and help you with substance abuse. But I believe when we let these life traumas hit us, they can rob us of really who we should be, who we're supposed to be in this life.
Absolutely.
And you found your way back, and it's just your story. I know is going to touch so many people. So again, I just want to thank you. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and I'm going to play the exit, and then I'll just talk to you after the interview. But thank you again, Aaron. I appreciate your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. A moment.